Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is April Silva, and I'm a junior here at the college studying communication and computer information systems. I am a member of Lambda Phi Eta, the Communication National Honor Society here at the college, as well as a comm protege. I'm really excited to be here today to moderate this session on what to expect in a remote internship or job in a primarily virtual world. So during this session, Advisory Council members Topper Ray, President of Bravo Group, Kat Taylor, partner at Birdhouse PR, Brian Jones, Chief Executive Officer of New Paradigm Media and Communications, and Kyle Reese, Director of Research at Gartner, are here to discuss this topic with us all and to share with us some of their insight and advice into what to expect in a remote job or internship nowadays, given the pandemic. So before we get started, we really want to make sure your questions are answered. So if and when you have any questions, please type them into the chat box so that the panelists can read them and answer them for you today towards the end of the session. So before we start, is there anything else that the panelists would like to add about themselves? Okay.
Nope, just happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So to kick off the session, I figured I would ask you guys a question. And that is, has there been a drastic change for you or your company when the world transitioned to being primarily virtual? And if so, could you explain why? So with that being said, I'll now pass the ball to whichever council member wants to start us off today.
I could start. So my name's Kat Taylor. I do PR here in Charleston at Birdhouse, a company that I own with my friend and partner, Annie. We didn't notice a ton of difference in transitioning to virtual. We were really lucky because it's just the two of us anyways. So going into the office was the same. Annie definitely noticed a bigger difference because she was at home with her kids. And I don't have that happening right now for me. So, but I do think that the transition to Zoom and conference calls with our clients, we mainly work with chefs, was a huge shift because they're just not used to technology like that. And they really value the like interpersonal, getting into the restaurant, eating their food, talking to them in person. So that was definitely a challenge for us.
I'll add just something here. I think Gartner has been kind of a predominantly virtual business for a while. We run all of our client calls with, people, executives around the country, around the world, through teleconferences, through WebEx, Zooms. When we were meeting with people in our different offices internally, our desk phones had cameras on them. So we could talk to people and kind of be face to face, even though we were sometimes at very large distances apart from one another. I think the biggest impact for us was around employee or team morale. Replacing the in-person meetings. I was up in New York every week meeting with my team of more junior associates who had this vision of what the working world was like. They were in the office every day, seeing each other, eating lunch with each other, going on, coffee breaks with one another. That all changed pretty quickly. And I think it took some considerable effort to kind of reframe people to that new operating model where almost all of our interactions, actually all of our interactions were virtual at that point. So that was the biggest change that I noticed. And I think we've leveled out at this point, but that's what I saw.
For me, it was interesting because I was just starting job search when the pandemic started. So everything shut down, as you all well know. And so you're just trying to figure out where the new normal, where the new level will be as all of this was happening out. Now, a year in, all of the companies out there have their systems in place. They know how to operate now. So if you're, and many of you will be doing this, if you're looking for employment or clients or to enlarge your business during these times, that year has paid off in companies having systems in place to be able to operate and to fill their ranks of employees, to go out and do new contracts and others. So, but it took a while for those companies to get their sea legs.
Yeah, I would say for us, and we're a mid-size agency, we've got about 75 folks. It was a pretty dramatic impact out of the gate. We had just entered the Western European market with a presence in the UK last year, actually, just at the end of 2019. And my partner was actually on the ground in the UK when the pandemic was unfolding in mid-March, and was scrambling to get back to the US. And we've got multiple offices, and we obviously shut all of them down. And I would pick up on Kyle's thread. You know, from a client interaction perspective, we worked really hard to make it seamless. And you know, to Kat's point, digital really enables all of that, right? You can kind of pretty quickly get into this environment and make it happen. But the employee connectivity absolutely has been something that has been a challenge. There's no question. You know, as a mid-sized shop, we thrive on that collaboration and the ability to be with each other. And so that hasn't happened in large part for a year. And so while we've maintained the business and, you know, client interactions, you know, have gone on, I'd say that, you know, new relationships, much tougher. I remember my very first pitch that I did in March via Zoom. The close time, the lag was incredible versus what would have normally been much quicker in person. So I'd say, you know, that the new plus employee engagement certainly remains a challenge, but fortunately, knock wood, hopefully the light is at the end of the tunnel here for all of us as we move into the coming months. So we're anticipating getting back into some in-person interaction.
Great. So I have another question. How can students like us be prepared for a remote internship?
So I actually was nervous about being on this talk initially because we've been doing so much of our work in person because it is just the two of us in the office. And actually our intern's on the Zoom right now. She's been coming into the office too, which has been really nice. But I did a class visit yesterday with a communications department. And it made me think about how students especially have had this whole year to prepare kind of. I mean, you guys are getting practice every day by having to do online class via Zoom. And as much as it probably isn't the greatest, you're getting that opportunity that none of us had when we were going to college. And not to call out anybody, but yesterday I was so disappointed in the fact that like everybody was wearing pajamas. Nobody's really had their cameras tuned in, good backgrounds. There were a few people eating breakfast. It was definitely, it kind of just felt like an afterthought, like they showed up to class. And knowing that there were going to be speakers who could potentially give you jobs, I would hope that people would put on a real shirt and maybe adjust their camera so that I could see them better. And so it started making me think about how you can really use your online class experiences as practice for internships and jobs. You should show up to every class like it is an internship or a job and be dressed for it and ready. And I went to the College of Charleston. I would roll into class in a t-shirt and shorts. But if I knew that somebody who could potentially hire me was going to be there, then I'd put on a dress or at least a collared shirt. So I feel like in thinking ahead, use that kind of as practice because you guys are getting that and we never did.
I think what Kat is also kind of referring to there, maybe like just to bring it up another level, is just your presence is really important. One of the things that is frustrating, even with like a more seasoned workforce, is working through a computer screen or like your phone. There's this tendency I've noticed, even with some of our most like vocal critics, you know, research authors who have, you know, are masters of their field and have a million opinions. When you start tearing apart their documents, everybody goes silent on a phone call, and they don't raise their hand or they don't ask a question, or you say something that you know is just like intended to egg them on and get them to respond to you, and then they don't say anything back, and then you get this passive aggressive email 10 minutes after the meeting's over that you offended them or something. So I think one of the things that's important there is just making sure that you not only show up and look like you care. I think the cat's one, although admittedly I wear UGG slippers, I think almost every single day.
Oh, I'm wearing slippers right now, no judgment.
I'm wearing a bathing suit,
Yeah.
just to be totally clear with everybody, but making sure that you're present, speaking up, raising your hands, using the chat, when it's live. I think those are, for group settings like that, a little bit different in an interview, but being present, I think, is a really important thing. You have only so many at-bats to ask a question, to meet people, to kind of like make your voice heard. That was true before the pandemic. I think it's even more true now when the channel has changed and you have to kind of use the time that's given to you to make that impact.
Yeah, I'll jump on that thread. The old adage, right? Everything communicates. I could not agree more with where Kat and Kyle are coming from. And, the ability to be present, to be, dressed for it, to be leaning into the conversation, to be practicing active listening via the virtual format, really, really important, because I also agree this is not going anywhere. And as we look at reopening our offices, for example, and we're targeting late summer, and I know a lot of larger multinationals are targeting fourth quarter, this format will remain a component of how we do business going forward, and will certainly be true for you all. And so on the one hand, the counsel of be present, everything communicates, lean into it, I 100% agree with. And then secondly, opportunistically, I would say the world opens up a bit more for folks. Geography becomes, less of a limiter. And so I would say you'll be looking at opportunities. Historically, perhaps you would have looked closer to where your hometown is, or maybe in Charleston. Now you're going to be able to see, and we are seeing talent from all over the place. So it's getting more competitive. Even more reason for the lean in, everything communicates counsel that you're hearing from all of us. But plus, be opportunistic. The world is your oyster at this point.
So we have a question in the chat from Dr. Goodyear. She says, do you all have some tips for ways to stand out in a positive way through the screen?
I'll come back to some advice that was given to me when I first started as an advisor at CEB, which came from this guy named Brent Adamson, who wrote a bunch of books. He's very telegenic, and he was more or less kind of our speaking coach to help us learn how to present ourselves through a variety of different formats, on stage, in person, podcasts, whatever. It sounds really cheesy, but it goes something like be the youiest you that you can be. And it's like this such a dumb phrase and I cannot get it out of my head. I disagree with this guy a lot, but it's like that, as well as like turn your energy level in your head up to 11, the proverbial 11 on the amp. Everything that you say through a screen has a tendency to get muted. For men, especially, we have a tendency to kind of speak at a more like monotone level. So for me, I know one of the things that I had to get used to was adding more inflection to my voice, learning how to add range, pauses, things that I otherwise wouldn't have really paid attention to. It probably pisses my wife off a lot because I sit down here and I just yell all day long. But I think, the point is kind of building off presence, just kind of being more aware of how small things in your voice, how you articulate yourself, how those things kind of come through, because it's much different in a virtual format than it is in person or other channels that you might use.
And I think others talked about the background earlier. The background is not as important as Kyle said, as the foreground. You're the person that of interest in the screen. So the attention should go to you, not that interesting cat book that you put in the bookcase, just so that your friends could see it. The background is getting a lot of attention because it gives you an ability to be creative. But I think that loses focus of what really the importance of the medium is. And that's for you to have the opportunity to convey your idea or your message or your personality. And so the background should supplement that, enhance that, not take away from that. And lighting and sound are very, very important. If you're using a bad laptop with a bad laptop microphone, it may be worth your while to invest on an upgrade on both lighting and sound, just so that you're not distracted. We've all had those conversations on cell phones when you can barely hear the other person and you're trying to make out their idea. You don't want that to be happening here.
Anything else you guys want to add to that?
I think they nailed it.
Me too. Can you guys talk a little bit about how your companies are onboarding new employees?
Very haphazardly. I think I feel like it's probably still one of the most frustrating things for us to figure out. Like, for all that it's worth, Gartner has 15,000 employees. We're all around the world. I don't know if like the process for onboarding before the pandemic was hard. Bringing people into a new organization, new knowledge bases, new skills to learn, new people to meet, and the networks big and small was already challenging. That becomes more complicated in a completely decentralized work environment. So what we're doing now is, I think, taking more time to basically convey to new hires, like being much more kind of hands-on or aware of like the explicit recommendations they need about who they need to talk to, why they need to talk to them, providing more explicit guidance on the resources that they need. I would say, like, the big thing, and this is one of the trends that we've seen in our communications research, kind of along the lines of what Topper was saying, for communications leaders, like working with HR functions, corporate strategy, employee engagement, disaffection is like number one, but then also looking at like internal comms channels, the intranet. How do your own like corporate internal corporate assets, how hard are those kind of functions or those things working for you? I'd say we're in the process of making a very big effort to kind of upgrade our intranet, or kind of workplace social network, if you will, which will play a big role in kind of facilitating onboarding at scale and in a virtual world. So those are some of the priorities that we're pushing through right now to kind of fix that problem.
I'll jump into the breach. This one, I agree, has been a challenge, Kyle, for us. And one of the things that we've tried to do is be more thoughtful about the folks that, from our side, existing employees that we are involving in that process, right? It used to be driven by our HR lead and then whoever the functional head was. And so we're not defaulting to that, because it seems as if you can create a little bit more dynamism in the initial interactions, it gets stickier and better. The uptake is quicker. And so we're trying to be a little bit more thoughtful about the folks that are sort of first in that process. But I'll say it's a challenge. There's just no question about it, right? This is the human interaction. You're beginning to see it and hear a theme coming, I think, across from all of us. While we have been able to maintain and advance and do interesting things in this format, it is, it's a barrier to human interaction. And so it remains a challenge. But that was one thing that we started to do, to be a little bit more forward-leaning and thoughtful about creating a dynamic interaction, and also making sure that people were prepared with enough background on the individual, and that you actually read it, so that you came to the conversation ready with some nuggets of understanding of this individual and what their value proposition was to the organization.
So with the virtual environment going on, do you guys think that we will continue do you think we'll continue as we move forward in vaccination rollout to be virtual, or do you think that students should prepare for both, being in person and virtual?
Both. Yeah,
I think
it's going to be a blended world.
I think if anything this last year taught us is that we're way more productive and happier when we're in person and when we get to connect with people. So I think that that's going to go back quicker than we actually anticipate when people get vaccinated. I think there's always going to be a virtual component, and you guys have a leg up in knowing how to use it better than we do. But I think you should be fully prepared to be at the office from 8 to 6 when you start working.
Or online. I mean, I think one of maybe a little differing point of view here is the kind of new world that we live in has actually created a pretty valuable retention lever for us. So when I say retention, how do you keep, I see a question in the chat about how do you keep or influence those who are disengaged. There was some pretty big, like political debates up at the office that I was working with in New York about who had the right to work from home. At what level were you allowed to work from home? There's this like embedded mistrust of anybody younger than the age of 25 because we couldn't trust them to like show up on time. I think a lot of us called BS on that, where it was like, okay, well, like as long as you're logged into a computer, we can see your green light on, you're churning out work, like we have a good sense of this. I think now people have kind of tapped into this idea that because we facilitate a virtual work environment now, we'll have a hybrid model going forward. We've seen a lot of, kind of younger students pick up and just go to new places. I think half of our workforce, like they left New York City and they're living in LA, or they're living in Utah, or they're taking, month-long like stints out in Wyoming because they just want to go live live in an Airbnb with friends in a group house for a month. Those kinds of things weren't possible before, or the organization wasn't really ready to think about that. So for us, it's been kind of, I think in some respects, like there's constraints, but there's more freedom to kind of go that. So in terms of like an engagement lever, retention lever, the environment kind of lends it well to some interesting new experiments with how we keep people engaged and in seat at the company.
Another question that came in to me was, how do you guys recommend searching for a job as positions are being offered more and more in person only? And how should we approach companies and their recruiters?
I'll jump. So did you say, April, positions being offered in person only? Was that the question?
Yeah, so I got a private message, but I can send it to everybody. But
no, that's quite all right. I just wanted to clarify. I'm surprised by that. Yeah, no, really surprised by that. I mean, we are not putting that forward in this calendar year for any of our positions that it's mandatory, because there's still going to be this huge lag. Even when we reopen the office, we've signaled to our employee base, to Kyle's point, for those for whom it's working, great. I have an example of a copywriter that we hired this year, who had been at a couple of other agencies and was living in New York. And we interviewed him via Zoom. He and his wife made it clear that they were moving to Charlotte as we were going through the process. They're now in Charlotte. We've never met in person. He continues to crank out, great work and be an essential part of the team. And so, those examples really, I think speak to the fact that it's here to stay. So in person, but I also would agree with Kat, be prepared for it. And if you can, absolutely post up, because it makes a difference. It just signals that you are committed organizationally. Now, obviously, you got to feel safe, and all those components have to be in place for that to happen. But assuming that is the case as we move to the balance of this year, I would highly recommend that you make a point to be present, physically present, and then take advantage of the opportunities. And I mean that in the most positive way. If you can be more productive in a virtual environment, by all means. I mean, it's going to be a blend. There's no question. And I agree with Kat's point. You all are way more prepared than we were. And so your ability to understand and feel comfortable in this environment is an advantage. So I wouldn't lose sight of that.
Another question. Last year was a critical time for students to gain internship experience. COVID put a stop to many of those opportunities. Since many did not get to have that experience, what shows you that a potential employee is credible or capable of the kind of work that you do?
What have you done during this time, during this pandemic? Everyone's had to deal with this various ways, especially personally and professionally, obviously. And, how have you benefited yourself and your background during a hopefully once in a lifetime event? That's going to be a key question for me.
I agree with that. And I'd also say that I had people who were reaching out to me knowing that probably coming into the office wasn't possible. And also my workload wasn't as much, but they just asked for a few hours of work a week just so that they could see what I was doing, or, craft pitches or list build for me. And I gave that opportunity to a few different people because I knew that they'd need it for their resume. So I think you can get creative in not the traditional internship, but maybe it's just like you're virtually shadowing somebody for a week to see what they do. I think we're all empathetic to the position that a lot of students are in right now, and you'll find people who can be flexible.
Remember, I think you're still all in school too. So I mean, yeah, like I know internship is one thing, but also, like making sure that you do well in school is also still like a very like good thing to work on. Because I think at least off the rip, employers look at your GPA and your level of involvement with classes and extracurriculars. So, I mean, if you feel like you've kind of come up dry on the internship front, remember that how you perform at an institution of higher education is still a very strong, signal to a future employer of your potential. So I wouldn't let, not to suggest that internships are bad or, that you don't need to pursue them, but remember, you're at school for a reason to like learn and like learn how to learn. And, that should show up or at least manifest itself in good grades and, teacher recommendations and things like that.
I also think to pick up on Brian's point, the aperture has widened for what those, call them extracurricular activities are that could be impactful to your value proposition as you're applying for a job. I think I agree with everything that both Kyle and Kat said as well. But I'd also say if you have something interesting that has garnered your attention and you historically might have said, well, this doesn't really kind of quite fit. I'm going to go talk to Kyle at Gartner. They don't want to hear about, this project that I did with X, Y, or Z. You may be surprised because it's an opportunity to demonstrate authenticity. And, in this unbelievably, pressure cooker that we've all been in, high pressure cooker, you found a way to differentiate and learn something. And I think that's of interest. I wouldn't that shouldn't go to the top of the list. I think, the traditional things still really count, your GPA and the coursework that you've taken, prior experience, but don't shy away from highlighting something that you felt was a positive change or really impacted you during this time.
We hire we look for people who like possess the ability to be critical thinkers. Like at the end of the day, that's what I know my company looks for. And it doesn't really matter where that comes up. There are many opportunities to like show that you're a critical thinker. So, we take a very broad lens to that. And I think it's worthwhile, to Topper's point, to kind of try to do the same.
Looks like that is the end of this session. Is there anything else that you guys want to add really quickly before we end it?
Just a thank you. Thanks for facilitating. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to everyone who came to listen in as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.